There are certain common mistakes that are commonly made in the physical sciences exam, and in fact in the assessments, the formal and informal as well. And we need to help the learners so they understand how not to make these mistakes and to guide them so they can get better results in the final exam. The first common mistake is that learners don't demonstrate the correct level of understanding. So what happens is often when learners answer the question, they don't read it correctly. Learners also don't identify what sort of answer is required. And then when they do answer it correctly, they don't often answer on the correct cognitive level. What we've got to prevent is learners regurgitating their facts all the time. Let me give you an example. This appeared in a question paper where learners were required to give a reason for their answer. And what happened was many learners calculated the answer instead of the ratio in this particular question. Some didn't even have the ability to express the answer in terms of a symbol. Many learners forgot to expand on their reason or failed to give a reason at all. The second example was quite a simple example, but learners struggled to apply their knowledge that high current has a heating effect and could cause damage to electric cables. Many answered just about the cost effectiveness of the question. How do we help our learners? How do we guide them through this so that they don't make these mistakes continuously? Well, the first is we need to emphasize the importance of both factual knowledge and the application of the knowledge in scenarios and examples. The other thing is we need to discourage the learners from regurgitating the facts. Get them to be exposed to a variety of different questions and coach them on how to approach the different questions. What's very useful is to provide the learners with a list of keywords and explain to them what to do when they see these in the exam. So for example, what does analyze mean? What does compare mean? What does evaluate mean? So that they actually answer the question on the correct cognitive level. The second common mistake is learners aren't able to calculate and use formulae correctly. So learners struggle because they're not familiar with the general formulae and calculations that they need for the actual exam. Often they even apply the incorrect formulae into a situation or an answer. They often substitute incorrectly into the learned formulae, so if they've got the formula right, they then incorrectly substitute the information. They also generally have poor mathematical skills and handling of calculators. And then learners tend to learn the steps off by heart rather than actually understanding the process. Here's another example. Some learners used incorrect formula or made incorrect substitutions into the actual formula. And due to weak mathematical skills, some learners did incorrect manipulations of the formula. Now, how do we help the learners? What can we do as teachers? The first is provide a list of formula for the learners. Learners should practice applying these formulae to appropriate situations and constantly emphasize the importance of becoming familiar with the procedures and different steps of calculation. Confidence is essential. Emphasize the marks that they could lose for unnecessary mistakes and if they're not confident with their formulae and calculations. And then encourage the learners to become fluent on their calculators. Make sure they know how to use them. Practice this in class as much as you can. The next common mistake is that learners aren't familiar with graphs and practical work. This is a huge problem because learners are unfamiliar with the different graphs. They're also unfamiliar with the different elements of the graph and have a poor idea or poor skill in graph reading. Learners cannot answer the questions based on practical work. In this example, learners were asked to sketch a graph of the potential difference generated at a power station versus time. Learners couldn't tell the difference between an AC and a DC graph. Many learners drew a straight line through the origin. How do we help our learners with this? Well, it's important that we consolidate the different types of graphs. We need to give the learners a mark breakdown so they know where the marks are awarded, and try and include as many graphs in our class teaching so that learners will become familiar with them. Also include a lot of practical work in our teaching. Make sure you're not just teaching the concepts, but you're actually exposing them to the different types of practical work. Remember, learners that are not exposed to practical work will lack the knowledge and experience to answer some questions, and they will lose unnecessary marks. The fourth common mistake is where learners aren't able to distinguish between content. Learners often give irrelevant content in an answer, and often learners confuse concepts and terminology. They don't know their basic definitions and often give drilled or guided responses to questions. They also don't know the difference between similar terms and confuse them. They don't know their content knowledge, and some struggle to even answer level 1 and 2 questions, your basic content questions. Let's have a look at this example. In this particular case, most learners could answer the questions, but what they struggled to do was give the correct explanation in terms of lost volts. So the context there was really difficult for them. In the second example, learners lacked the knowledge of properties of sound waves such as frequency, speed, pitch, and loudness, and many learners assumed the answer was actually the Doppler effect. Once again, we've got to make sure the learners actually understand the basic content and they don't get confused. How do we help our learners with this? Well, the first is we can emphasize the importance of understanding the facts and not just learning them off by heart. We've also got to emphasize the importance of reading the question carefully, as well as providing suitable examples. And this we can help them with by providing suitable examples in class to difficult concepts so the learners are easily able to distinguish between the terminology used. We need to support the learners in identifying the appropriate factual information to support their answer. And most importantly, learners should be encouraged to use the correct information to answer the question and at the correct cognitive level. And we mustn't underestimate the value of assessments and how they can actually prepare the learners. So teachers should ensure that the formal assessments, things like your tests, experiments, investigations, familiarize the learners with the important concepts and content. But equally as important are the informal assessments, and these should assist the learners in distinguishing between the different content. And remember, your informal assessment guides your formal assessment. So hopefully with all these tips, it will help the learners and you in the classroom to eliminate these common mistakes in their final exam paper, and hopefully they get the marks that they really do deserve.